Hello. Today's talk is St. Margaret of Scotland, a saint of our times. So we really don't know a lot about St. Margaret of Scotland. She's just not that common in America. So in this talk, we're going to delve into some details about her life, how she affected culture, and how we too can imitate her and affect the culture of our times. So she was born in Hungary about the year 1045. Her parents were the exiled English Saxon Prince Edward the Outlaw and the German Princess Agatha. They lived in Hungary until she was about 12 years old when she moved to England to live in the court of St. Edward the Confessor, which is the home of her father. She lived there till her father was again forced to flee England because of the Norman conquest. They lived peacefully and in exile until 1066 AD, until her father died, leaving her mother a very difficult choice, whether or not to move back to England, or to move back to Hungary, or to stay where they were living in exile. Her mother chose to go back to Hungary, and on the way there, they were shipwrecked off the coast of Scotland. This is where Malcolm III, who was actually the son of Duncan I, who was killed by Macbeth. If anyone who's ever read Shakespeare Macbeth, King Duncan I was that same person who was in Shakespeare's Macbeth. So Malcolm III assisted the family and offered to protect them. He fell in love with St. Margaret, who was at the time considering becoming a nun in a convent, but ultimately found that her vocation lay with Malcolm and decided to marry him and become Queen of Scotland. They married about the year 1068 or 1070 AD, and together they had 8 children. While living in the royal court, she lived a very personal, holy life. Only some of the penances that she would do were the 40 days fast before Christmas and Easter, and in fact, her fast days were so severe that her feast days were actually fast days of others. And now the fasting days in the Middle Ages were actually very strict. So that meant only meat at one meal, if they would even have meat at a meal. No dairy, no eggs, and there's a lot of other restrictions that middle-aged man followed. So to think that she had gone even stricter than that is almost unbelievable, but she did. And she would also, during her fasting, sleep only a few hours a night, rising very early into the night to pray. And some of the prayers that she would say would be the 3 sets of matins, the offices of the dead, the whole Psalter, and she would attend 5 or 6 private masses before the public mass. And almost single-handedly, she prevented a schism from happening between the Church of Scotland and Rome. Throughout the kingdom, she was known for her great charity. She would open the doors to the castle at certain hours during the morning so that any person, poor, people who had grievances, the orphaned, the aged, could come to her, and she would personally, not her attendants, she would personally take care of them. She would help them with her own 2 hands. Those who were wronged would spill the grievances to her, and she would right them if she could. Whenever she'd meet the poor on the street, she would give them whatever she had. And if she didn't have anything to give, she would beg her attendants who were with her to lend her some of their money, so she could never send one of Christ's poor away without anything to provide them with. So, through her saintly example, the king never begrudged her anything she would ask for. In fact, he even began to help her with some of her saintly ministries. When the poor would come into their homes, he began to assist them as well. If she asked him to empty the whole treasury for her, he would do it because he trusted not only St. Margaret, but St. Margaret's trust in God, and he knew that everything would be okay. He would never doubt anything bad would not happen because of St. Margaret's use of the treasury. He would do anything she asked for her. on God's behalf. She died in about the year 1093, and she is canonized in 1250 or 1251. She made the patroness of Scotland in 1673, and today we celebrate her feast day on June 10th. Now that we know a little bit about St. Margaret, we can see some of the influences she had on the culture of her times. So her goal was no different. It was the same as every other king and queen of the Middle Ages at that time. That was to become nothing less than a saint and to provide an atmosphere of a Christian Catholic civilization. Scotland at this point in time was still a very barbaric nation where the rest of Europe was advancing. Scotland was still very primitive in a lot of its resources and its clothes and manners. St. Margaret brought the light of Europe into the darkness of Scotland, into the barbaricness of Scotland. She introduced multiple traders and craftsmen. She introduced various garments of fine material which they had never known before, such as silks and velvets. She introduced the custom of the king's escort, forbidding them to downtrod the poor when they're out, but also demanding the poor to respect the king as king. She introduced into the world the custom of having coffee after dinner, for conversation's sake and for reflection. She furnished the king's house with many paintings and tapestries of gold and silver. She taught her children to mind their elders and those who deserved respect. In fact, this was so impressed into her children that throughout the rest of their lives, they were known for having the best mannerisms and the best civility throughout any kingdom of the Middle Ages. And that trait stayed into the family for many generations after that. She had a great personal love for books. She would read them and love them. And her husband, upon seeing this, he was king, but he could not read. He had no literary sense whatsoever. But he found himself loving books for her sake. He would hold them carefully and caress them. He would kiss the covers of their books and carry them gently because he knew how much they meant to her and their great value because of what she estimated it to be. In fact, he would take one or two of her favorites and send it to a goldsmith so that way they could decorate it with silver and jewels, and he'd replace it back on her shelf, so to delight her. In the court, she was dignified and refined, and in fact, she was so dignified that no man she would never suffer any frivolousness, flirtation, or crudity, and no man would ever dare to say anything wrong in her sight because she was such a zealous person. They didn't know what would come of it. They feared her. They loved her, but they feared her. So, in her whole entire reign, not a single profane word was ever said in her presence in the court. In her reign, she advanced education and freed the slaves that were existing in Scotland. She changed all of Scotland faster than the forced Norman conquest did in England. So now that we've seen what St. Margaret did to her culture, we have to ask ourselves, why is culture important? Why is it what St. Margaret did so prevalent? Why was it so important? Well, this is because culture and the things that surround us offer graces to our souls by their contemplation and reflection of heaven. Professor Plinio Correa de Oliveira once said, "The search for the marvelous fills the soul with the correct and upright, the world of our Lord, Jesus Christ, and its extension to temple order. When such values do not pervade the souls of the people, they begin to travel in the wrong direction." St. Margaret did not bring jewels and gold into Scotland because she had a great personal love for them, but rather she saw what they could do if they were used for the good. She didn't use them for frivolity. She used them to help her soul understand what was good and to love God through it. So we're going to take a pause here. We're going to see there's no contradiction between simplicity and refinement. So I have a couple pictures here. One, this is Our Lady of Fatima as she appeared in 1917, same as the statue in the background. As we can see, she's dressed very simply. She has only a plain white dress on with a plain white veil and a simple gold trimming. In fact, when she appeared in 1917, her crown was not there. This was later placed on her by a pope. She appeared without the crown in her original apparition. So in her first apparition, we can see the simplicity and the beauty of simplicity. But here is a picture of Our Lady of Good Success, Queen of Heaven. This is as we would picture a queen to be. We expect no less of a queen to appear than the way Our Lady appears in here. She is no longer simple. She is dignified in the way a queen would be dignified. She is adorned with jewels and a crown. So we can see in Our Lady that there's no contradiction in between being refined and having a simple nature. There's no necessarily one that's better than the other. This is shown in different saints. Different saints were known for their different marvelous traits. So like queens of different Saint Elizabeth of Hungary, also very dignified. She also wore jewels because she was a queen. She was stately as a queen should be. But then we see Saint Gemma Galgani. All she wore was a simple black dress. But yet that simple black dress was worn with such a dignified place. Like the way she would sit and walk and move was so dignified that her dress, though simple, became elegant. It was in fact very beautiful what she wore, even if it was just plain black. So now that we have that, we understand now that fine things are good in of themselves. It's only when we use them for wrong that they become bad. It's only when we start turning into frivolity and pride that it becomes rotten. So such a concept can be understood in the thought of giving Our Lady flowers. Now we've all done it. We all love Our Lady, so we love to give her things. Giving flowers to Our Lady could be either a good thing or a bad thing. So giving Our Lady flowers is good. And our intention is to give Our Lady flowers because we love her. And we want to show her that we love her. Only as that. But it becomes bad when we give Our Lady flowers. When we pick a big bouquet because we want to show off to everyone else that we love Our Lady. It's no longer about Our Lady then. It's about everyone else drawing attention to you. There's nothing more there. So, as we can see there, it's the same thing with refinement. Refinement, if it's meant to enrich the soul, to help the soul to love God, then it's a wonderful thing. But when people misuse things such as gold or a beautiful teacup to show off to their friends about themselves, then it no longer is good. So refinement has always been a culture, a mark of culture which loves God. Think of two different cultures, for example. One is the height of the Middle Ages. This is a culture that loves God. We look at the buildings that were made at this time. For instance, the Sainte-Chapelle. Nothing that we have made comes near it. The beauty of the stained glass windows and the paint inside was made by primitive tools of the Middle Ages. And yet we have modern technology that should be able to equal or surpass it, but we don't. It's not because we can't, it's because we don't want to. Now think about the communist regimes that we have seen in the past. These are cultures that despise God, that despise order. These have always been plain, cookie cutter, degenerate. The lives of the people intolerable. This is what happens when society no longer loves God or seeks beauty. These things aren't meant just to be beautiful, but help our souls to be beautiful and to lead our lives in a beautiful way so we can live in a beautiful society which follows God's principles. Culture in a nation is defined by its dress, its habits, and its conversation. Just to take a look at the recent past, we're living in a satanic, ugly culture of death at the moment. We've had a rising number of public satanic black masses and monuments to Satan being pushed upon us in every corner. Abortion is legalized and provided for. Marriage is distorted. There's the, not to get too graphic in case there are younger ones listening, there's a confusion as to whether people are boys or girls. The matter of commonplace dress is at a shameful degree. People are disfiguring their bodies so that way they no longer resemble God, and they're starting to resemble something more like demons and all the overabundance of piercings and tattoos. The family's in such a breakdown that no one is paying respect or loving as they should. Egalitarianism, which is the thought process that no one can be different from the other or rise above each other in different talents or gifts that they have. We all have to remain the same no matter what. This is spreading to all different degrees of society, even people who should be our leaders. A recent example of this is Prince Harry and his fiancée Meghan Markle's engagement. I don't know how many have been keeping up on the royal news, but those two have been breaking a lot of royal traditions in their engagements. And it seems insignificant, but it's actually of major significance because it's a lot of people have been commenting like, oh, it's good because they're like us. Well, you see, they're no different. When in fact they are. They are our leaders in society, and we should be striving to be like them. They shouldn't be cutting down to be like the normal common day people. We should be striving to be better as they are striving to be better. So now that we see this, we have to ask ourselves, what's our task in society? This is where I must implore all of you to fight as St. Margaret did. Our task is nothing other but than the same thing, to influence our society. And to Blessed Pier Giorgio Frassati once said, to live without faith, without a heritage to defend, without battling constantly for truth, is not to live, but to get along. We must never just get along. So we must live for our Lord and Our Lady, as St. Margaret did, and rise up against the barbarianism of our time in our society. And we must resurrect a love for God in our culture and in our society. Our aim should be to build nothing other than a sacral society. A society which brings the sacred into the temporal order, which helps us to bring the holiness into the everyday life. Now, to clear things up, a sacred thing and a sacral thing. A sacred object would be that which belongs to the ecclesiastical order. So we're talking about like the hierarchy of the church, the bishops, the priests, and the people, such like that. Whereas a sacral society would be more of the temporal order. So to put it in terms kind of like the monarchy of England, or our president and the senators and the congressmen and all of that. That's the temporal order. So that is what a sacral society would kind of be, something that imitates God in the sacred order, in the temporal order. So we want to establish a sacral society, a holy society. Man receives graces either directly from God or indirectly from the people and experiences and things around him. And this is where the evil of egalitarianism comes from. If we get rid of our role models and there's no one to imitate, we find ourselves deprived of graces because we have nothing to raise our mind to, nothing to uplift us. There's nothing to remind us of God. So when we get rid of graces, we get rid of God. When we get rid of God, We resemble nothing other than the society, if it can be called that, of hell itself. The temporal order is the creation of God, so therefore should give him glory. Professor Plinio Carrera de Oliveira also said, when the tendency toward the sacral is in disarray, all their tendencies as a whole are not in order. In order of tendencies, the sacral drags everything behind it, which means if we get rid of what a sacral society is, we begin to see the results of what we see in today's society. But we shouldn't lose heart, because even though things look dark around us, God's will, if we do it, if we follow God's will, he will use our insignificance and turn it into something great. We live in a time which calls for heroism and not faint-heartedness. It is not easy to live in the culture, in the life of, in the grace of God. We suffer pressure from all around us. There's work, the people that we live with in our lives that who we appreciate generally but don't always hold the same values as we do. The drudge of life and time. Time can wear the effect of an immediate grace, so that way we forget what it was like when we first received a grace that made us happy in God's presence. Life gets tiresome, and enthusiasm for a cause gets lost. And we see the constant defeat of good in our society. We wonder, is it worth it? Are we going to lose anyway? So should we fight? Our society is so downhill. Should we? I'm going to finish with a final thought. It's a poem by Father Leonard Feeney of the Society of Jesus called The Way of the Cross. Along the dark aisles of a chapel dim, the little lame girl drags her withered limb, and all alone she searches the shadows on the wall to find the 3 places where Jesus falls. So we are like the girl in the chapel. It's dim all around. We are often hurt, alone, alone in the fight. We don't fit in. And oftentimes we just want to give up. But we weren't made to fit in. We were made to stand out. And with the grace of God, because we can't do without it, we will rise up again and again, lift our sword in the fight. We will challenge Satan, and we will defeat him in the end. In the end, we have to remember that after the crucifixion came the resurrection. Thank you very much.